Hello, everyone, and welcome to NAU Theater's Story Hour. Today we are on broadcast 11, and we are doing some chapter books. I want to remind you that all of our books are in public domain, and they are available online, or if you can get to the library, get yourself a book. All right, everybody, here we go. Today's chapter books are White Fang, A Modern Cinderella or A Very Old Shoe, The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, and The Story of Dr. Dolittle. Well, let's get started with our first story. Enjoy.
White Fang by Jack London. Part 2, Chapter 1, The Battle of the Fangs. It was the she-wolf who had first caught the sound of men's voices and the whining of the sled dogs, and it was the she-wolf who was first to spring away from the cornered man in his circle of dying flame. The pack had been loath to forgo the kill it had hunted down, and it lingered for several minutes, making sure of the sounds, and then it too sprang away on the trail made by the she-wolf. Running at the forefront of the pack was a large gray wolf, one of its several leaders. It was he who directed the pack's course on the heels of the she-wolf, and it was he who snarled warningly at the younger members of the pack or slashed at them with his fangs when they ambitiously tried to pass him. And it was he who increased the pace when he sighted the she-wolf now trotting slowly across the snow. She dropped in alongside by him as though it were her appointed position and took the pace of the pack. He did not snarl at her, nor show his teeth when any leap of hers chanced to put her in advance of him. On the contrary, he seemed kindly disposed towards her. Too kindly to suit her, for he was prone to run near her, and when he ran too near, it was she who snarled and showed her teeth. Nor was she above slashing his shoulder sharply on occasion. At such times, he betrayed no anger. He merely sprang to the side and ran stiffly ahead for several awkward leaps in carriage and conduct, resembling an abashed country swain. This was his one trouble in the running of the pack, but she had other troubles. On her other side ran a gaunt old wolf, grizzled and marked with the scars of many battles. He ran always on her right side. The fact that he had but one eye, and that the left eye, might account for this. He also was addicted to crowding her, to veering toward her till his scarred muzzle touched her body or shoulder or neck. As with the running maid on the left, she repelled these attentions with her teeth, but she both bestowed their attentions at the same time she was roughly jostled, being compelled, with quick snaps to either side, to drive both lovers away, and at the same time to maintain her forward leap with the pack and see the way of her feet before her. At such times, her running mates flashed their teeth and growled threateningly across at each other. They might have fought, but even wooing and its rivalry waited upon the more pressing hunger need of the pack. After each repulse, when the old wolf sheered abruptly away from the sharp-toothed object of his desire, he shouldered against a young 3-year-old that ran on his blind right side. This young wolf had attained his full size, and, considering the weak and famished condition of the pack, he possessed more than the average vigor and spirit. Nevertheless, he ran with his head even with the shoulder of his one-eyed elder. When he ventured to run abreast of the older wolf, which was seldom, a snarl and a snap sent him back even with the shoulder again. Sometimes, however, he dropped cautiously and slowly behind and edged in between the old leader and the she-wolf. This was doubly resented, even triply resented. When she snarled her displeasure, the old leader would whirl on the 3-year-old. Sometimes she whirled with him too, and sometimes the young leader on the left whirled as well. At such times, confronted by 3 sets of savage teeth, the young wolf stopped precipitately, throwing himself back on his haunches, with forelegs stiff, mouth menacing, and mane bristling. This confusion in the front of the moving pack always caused confusion in the rear. The wolves behind collided with the young wolves and expressed their displeasure by administering sharp nips at his hind legs and flanks. He was laying up trouble for himself, for lack of food and short tempers went together. But with the boundless fate of youth, he persisted in repeating the maneuver every little while, though it never succeeded in gaining anything for him but discomfiture. Had there been food, love-making and fighting would have gone on apace, and the pack formation would have been broken up. But the situation of the pack was desperate. It was lean with long-standing hunger. It ran below its ordinary speed. At the rear limped the weak members, the very young and the very old. At the front were the strongest, yet all were more like skeletons than full-bodied wolves. Nevertheless, with the exception of the ones that limped, the movements of the animals were effortless and tireless. Their stringy muscles seemed founts of inexhaustible energy. Behind every steel-like contraction of a muscle lay another steel-like contraction, and another, apparently without end. They ran many miles that day. They ran through the night, and the next day found them still running. They were running over the surface of a world frozen and dead. No life stirred. They alone moved through the vast inertness. They alone were alive, and they sought for other things that were alive in order that they might devour them and continue to live. They crossed low divides and ranged a dozen small streams in a lower-lying country before their quest was rewarded. Then they came upon moose. It was a big bull they first found. Here was meat and life, and it was guarded by no mysterious fires nor flying missiles of flame. Splay hoofs and palmated antlers they knew, and they flung their customary patience and caution to the wind. It was a brief fight, and fierce. The big bull was beset on every side. He ripped them open or split their skulls with shrewdly driven blows on his great hoofs. He crushed them and broke them on his large horns. He stamped them into the snow under him in a wallowing struggle. But he was foredoomed, and he went down with the she-wolf tearing savagely at his throat, and with other teeth fixed everywhere upon him, devouring him alive, before ever his last struggle ceased or his last damage had been wrought. There was food in plenty. The bull weighed over 800 pounds, fully 20 pounds of meat per mouth for the 40-odd wolves of the pack. But if they could fast prodigiously, they could feed prodigiously, and soon a few scattered bones were all that remained of the splendid live brute that had faced the pack a few hours before. There was now much resting and sleeping. With full stomachs, bickering and quarreling began among the younger males, and this continued through the few days that followed before the breaking up of the pack. The famine was over. The wolves were now in the country of game, and though they still hunted in pack, they hunted more cautiously, cutting out heavy cows or crippled old bulls from the small moose herds they ran across. There came a day, in this last land of plenty, when the wolf pack split in half and went in different directions. The she-wolf, the young leader on her left, and the one-eyed elder on her right, led their half of the pack down to the Mackenzie River and across into the lake country to the east. Each day, this remnant of the pack dwindled. 2 by 2, male and female, the wolves were deserting. Occasionally, a solitary male was driven out by the sharp teeth of his rivals. In the end, there remained only 4. The she-wolf, the young leader, the one-eyed one, and the ambitious 3-year-old. The she-wolf had by now developed a ferocious temper. Her 3 suitors all bore the marks of her teeth, yet they never replied in kind, never defended themselves against her. They turned their shoulders to her most savage slashes, and with wagging tails and mincing steps strove to placate her wrath. But if they were all mildness toward her, they were all fierceness toward one another. The 3-year-old grew too ambitious in his fierceness. He caught the one-eyed elder on his blind side and ripped his ear into ribbons. Though the grizzled old fellow could see only on one side, against the youth and vigor of the other, he brought into play the wisdom of long years of experience. His lost eye and his scarred muzzle bore evidence to the nature of his experience. He had survived too many battles to be in doubt for a moment about what to do. The battle began fairly. But it did not end fairly. There was no telling what the outcome would have been, for the third wolf joined the elder, and together, old leader and young leader, they attacked the ambitious 3-year-old and proceeded to destroy him. He was beset on either side by the merciless fangs of his erstwhile comrades. Forgotten were the days they had hunted together, the game they had pulled down, the famine they had suffered. That business was a thing of the past. The business of love was at hand, ever a sterner and crueler business than that of food getting. And in the meanwhile, the she-wolf, the cause of it all, sat down contentedly on her haunches and watched. She was even pleased. This was her day, and it came not often. When manes bristled and fangs smote fang or ripped and tore the yielding flesh, all for the possession of her. And in the business of love, the 3-year-old who had made this his first adventure upon it yielded up his life. On either side of his body stood his 2 rivals. They were gazing at the she-wolf who sat smiling in the snow. But the elder leader was wise, very wise, in love even as in battle. The younger leader turned his head to lick a wound on his shoulder. The curve of his neck was turned toward his rival. With his one eye, the elder saw the opportunity. He darted in low and closed with his fangs. It was a long, ripping slash, and deep as a well. His teeth, in passing, burst the wall of the great vein of the throat. Then he leaped clear. The young leader snarled terribly, but his snarl broke midmost into a tickling cough. Bleeding and coughing, already stricken, he sprang at the elder and fought while life faded from him, his legs going weak beneath him, the light of day dulling in his eyes, his blows and springs falling shorter and shorter. And all the while, the she-wolf sat on her haunches and smiled. She was made glad in vague ways by the battle, for this was the love-making of the wild, the sex tragedy of the natural world that was tragedy only to those that died. To those that survived, it was not tragedy, but realization and achievement. When the young leader lay in the snow and moved no more, one eye stalked over to the she-wolf. His carriage was one of mingled triumph and caution. He was plainly expectant of a rebuff, and he was just as plainly surprised when her teeth did not flash out at him in anger. For the first time, she met him with a kindly manner. She sniffed noses with him and even condescended to leap about and frisk and play with him in quite a puppyish fashion. And he, for all his gray years and sage experience, behaved quite as puppyishly and even a little more foolishly. Forgotten already were the vanquished rivals and the love tale written on the snow. Forgotten, save once, when old One Eye stopped for a moment to lick his stiffening wounds. Then it was that his lips half writhed into a snarl, and the hair of his neck and shoulders involuntarily bristled, while he half crouched for a spring, his claws spasmodically clutching into the snow surface for firmer footing. But it was all forgotten the next moment, as he sprang after the she-wolf, who was coyly leading him a chase through the woods. And that they ran side by side like good friends who have come to an understanding. The days passed by, and they kept together, hunting their meat and killing and eating in common. After a time, the she-wolf began to grow restless. She seemed to be searching for something that she could not find. The hollows under fallen trees seemed to attract her, and she spent much time nosing about among the large snow-piled crevices in the rocks and in the caves of overhanging banks. Old One Eye was not interested at all, but he followed her good-naturedly in her quest, and when her investigations in particular places were unusually protracted, he would lie down and wait until she was ready to go on. They did not remain in one place, but traveled across country until they regained the Mackenzie River, down which they slowly went, leaving it often to hunt game along the small streams that entered it, but always returning to it again. Sometimes they chanced upon other wolves, usually in pairs, but there was no friendliness of intercourse displayed on either side, no gladness at meeting, no desire to return to pack formation. Several times they encountered solitary wolves. These were always males, and they were pressingly insistent on joining with One Eye and his mate. This he resented, and when she stood shoulder to shoulder with him, bristling and showing her teeth, the aspiring solitary ones would back off, turn tail, and continue on their lonely way. One moonlight night, running through the quiet forest, One Eye suddenly halted. His muzzle went up, his tail stiffened, and his nostrils dilated as he scented the air. One foot also he held up, after the manner of a dog. He was not satisfied, and he continued to smell the air, striving to understand the message borne upon it to him. One careless sniff had satisfied his mate, and he trotted on to reassure him. Though he followed her, he was still dubious, and he could not forbear an occasional halt in order to more carefully to study the warning. She crept out cautiously on the edge of a large, open space in the midst of the trees. For some time she stood alone. Then One Eye, creeping and crawling every sense on the alert, every hair radiating infinite suspicion, joined her. They stood side by side, watching and listening and smelling. To their ears came the sounds of dogs wrangling and scuffling, the guttural cries of men, the sharper voices of scolding women, and once the shrill and plaintive cry of a child. With the exception of the huge bulks of the skin lodges, little could be seen save the flames of fire, broken by the movements of intervening bodies and the smoke rising slowly on the quiet air. But to their nostrils came the myriad smells of an Indian camp, carrying a story that was largely incomprehensible to One Eye, but every detail of which the she-wolf knew. She was strangely stirred, and sniffed with an increasing delight. But old One Eye was doubtful. He betrayed his apprehension and started tentatively to go. She turned and touched his neck with her muzzle in a reassuring way, then regarded the camp again. A new wistfulness was in her face, but it was not the wistfulness of hunger. She was thrilling to a desire that urged her to go forward, to be in closer to that fire, to be squabbling with the dogs, and to be avoiding and dodging the stumbling feet of men. One Eye moved impatiently beside her. Her unrest came back upon her, and she knew again her pressing need to find the thing that for which she searched. She turned and trotted back into the forest, to the great relief of One Eye, who trotted a little to the fore until they were well within the shelter of the trees. And they slid along, noiseless as shadows in the moonlight. They came upon a runway. Both noses went down to the footprints of the snow. These footprints were very fresh. One Eye ran ahead cautiously, his mate at his heels. The broad pads of their feet were spread wide, and in contact with the snow were like velvet. One Eye caught sight of a dim movement of white in the midst of the white. His sliding gait had been deceptively swift, but it was as nothing to the speed at which he now ran. Before him was bounding the faint patch of white he had discovered. They were running along a narrow alley flanked on either side by a growth of young spruce. Through the trees, the mouth of the alley could be seen opening out on a moonlit glade. Old One Eye was rapidly overhauling the fleeing shape of white. Bound by bound he gained. Now he was upon it. One leap more and his teeth would be sinking into it, but that leap was never made. High in the air and straight up soared the shape of white, now a struggling snowshoe rabbit that leaped and bounded, executing a fantastic dance there above him in the air, and never once returning to earth. One Eye sprang back with a snort of sudden fright, then shrank down to the snow and crouched, snarling threats at this thing of fear he did not understand. But the she-wolf coolly thrust past him. She poised for a moment, then sprang for the dancing rabbit. She too soared high, but not so high as the quarry, and her teeth clipped emptily together with a metallic snap. She made another leap, and another. Her mate had slowly relaxed from his crouch and was watching her. He now evinced displeasure at her repeated failures, and himself made a mighty spring upward. His teeth closed upon the rabbit, and he bore it back to earth with him. But at the same time, there was a suspicious crackling movement beside him, and his astonished eye saw a young spruce sapling bending down above him to strike him. His jaws let go their grip, and he leaped backward to escape the strange danger, his lips drawn back from his fangs, his throat snarling, every hair bristling with rage and fright. And in that moment, the sapling reared its slender length upright, and the rabbit soared dancing in the air again. The she-wolf was angry. She sank her fangs into her mate's shoulder in reproof, and he, frightened, unaware of what constituted this new onslaught, struck back ferociously and in still greater fright, ripping down the side of the she-wolf's muzzle. For him to resent such reproof was equally unexpected to her, and she sprang upon him in snarling indignation. Then he discovered his mistake and tried to placate her. But she proceeded to punish him roundly until he gave over all attempts at placation and whirled in a circle, his head away from her, his shoulders receiving the punishment of her teeth. In the meantime, the rabbit danced above them in the air. The she-wolf sat down on the snow, and old One-Eye, now more in fear of his mate than of the mysterious sapling, again sprang for the rabbit. As he sank back with it between his teeth, he kept his eye on the sapling. As before, it followed him back to earth. He crouched down under the impending blow, his hair bristling, but his teeth still keeping tight hold of the rabbit. But the blow did not fall. The sapling remained bent above him. When he moved, it moved, and he growled at it through his clenched jaws. When he remained still, it remained still, and he concluded it was safer to continue remaining still. Yet the warm blood of the rabbit tasted good in his mouth. It was his mate who relieved him from the quandary in which he found himself. She took the rabbit from him, and while the sapling swayed and teetered threateningly above her, she calmly gnawed off the rabbit's head. At once the sapling shot up, and after that gave no more trouble, remaining in the decorous and perpendicular position in which nature had intended it to grow. Then, between them, the she-wolf and One-Eye devoured the game which the mysterious sapling had caught for them. There were other runways and alleys where rabbits were hanging in the air, and the wolf pair prospected them all, the she-wolf leading the way, old One-Eye following and observant, learning the method of robbing snares, a knowledge destined to stand him in good stead in the days to come.
Well, that was fun. And next up, we have a modern Cinderella, or a little old shoe.
Hi guys, Miss Haley here. Welcome back to yet another week of story time. I'm going to be continuing our modern Cinderella tale. Just a quick recap, the girls' fathers have died. So now the three girls are trying to figure out what they want to do with the rest of their lives. Nan talked about wanting to raise kids and have a family, and John, of course, is still pursuing Nan and seems to be interested in pursuing her in the long haul. So let's see what happens. Nan's plan was carried into effect. Slowly, the divided waters closed again, and the three fell back into their old lives. But the touch of sorrow drew them closer, and though invisible, a beloved presence still moved among them. A familiar voice still spoke to them in the silence of their softened ears. Thus the soil was made ready, and in the depth of the winter the good seed was sown, was watered with many tears, and soon sprang up green with a promise of a harvest for thereafter years. Dee and Laura consoled themselves with their favorite employments, unconscious that Nan was growing paler, thinner, and more silent. As the weeks went by, till one day she dropped quietly before them, and it suddenly became manifest that she was utterly worn out with many cares and the secret suffering of a tender heart, bereft of the paternal love which had been its strength and stay. "I'm only tired, dear girls, don't be troubled, for I shall be up tomorrow," she said cheerily as she looked into the anxious faces bending over her. But the weariness was of many months' growth, and it was weeks before that tomorrow ever came. Laura installed herself as a nurse, and her devotion was repaid fourfold. For sitting at her sister's beside, she learned a finer art than that she had left. Her eye grew clear to see the beauty of a self-denying life, and in the depths of Nan's meek nature, she found the strong, sweet virtues that made her what she is. Then, remembering that these womanly attributes were at a bride's best dowry, Laura gave herself to their attainment, that she might become to another household the blessing Nan had been to her own. And turning from the worship of the goddess beauty, she gave her hand to that humbler and more human teacher, Duty, learning her lessons with a willing heart for Philip's sake. Dee corked her inkstand, locked her bookcase, and went at housework as if it were a 5-barred gate. And of course she missed the leap, but scrambled bravely through, and appeared much sobered by the exercise. Sally had departed to sit under a vine and fig tree of her own, so Dee had undisputed sway. But if dishpans and dusters had tongues, direful would have been the history of that crusade against frost and fire, indolence and inexperience. But they were dumb, and Dee scorned to complain, though her struggles were pathetic to behold, and her sisters went through a series of messes equal to the course of Prince Benredin's peppery starts, tears or helmets and shield. Reality turned romance out of doors, for unlike her favorite heroines in satin and tears or helmets and shield, Dee met her fate in a big checked apron and dust cap. Wonderful to see, yet she wielded her broom as stoutly as Molly Pitcher shouldered her gun and marched to her daily martyrdom in the kitchen with as heroic as a heart as the Maid of Orleans took her to stake. Mind won the victory over matter in the end. Indeed was better all her days for her tribulations and the triumph of that time, for she drowned her idle fancies in her washtub, made burnt offerings of selfishness and pride, and learned the worth of self-denial, as she sang with happy voice among the pots and kettles of her conquered realm. Nan thought of John, and in the stillness of her sleepless nights, prayed heaven to keep him safe, and make her worthy to receive, and strong enough to bear, the blessedness or love of pain. Snow fell without, and keen winds howled among the leafless elms, but herbs of grace were blooming beautifully in the sunshine of sincere endeavor. And this dreariest season proved the most fruitful of the year, for love taught Laura, labor chastened Dee, and patience fit Nan for the blessing of her life. Nature, that stillest yet most diligent of housewives, began at last the spring cleaning, which she makes so pleasant that none find the heart to grumble as they do when other matrons set their premises adust. Her handmaids, wind and rain, and sun swept, washed, and garnished busily. Green carpets were unrolled, apple boughs were hung with draperies of bloom, and dandelions, pet nurslings of the year, come out to play upward the sward. From the south returned that opera troupe whose manager is never in despair, whose tenor never sulks, whose prima donna never fails. And in the orchard bona fide, matinees were held, to which buttercups and clovers crowded in their prettiest spring hats, and verdant young blades twinkled in their dewy lorgnettes, as they bowed and made way for the floral bells. May was bidding June good morrow, and the roses were just dreaming that it was almost time to wake, when John came again into the quiet room, which now seemed the Eden that contained his Eve. Of course, there was a jubilee, but something seemed to have befallen the whole group, for they had never appeared in such odd frames of mind. John was restless and wore an excited look, most unlike his usual serenity of aspect. Nan, the cheerful, had fallen into a well of silence, and was not to be extracted by any hydraulic power, though she smiled like the June sky over her head. These peculiarities were out in full force, and she looked as if she would go off like a torpedo at a touch. But through all her moods, there was a half-triumph, half-remorseful expression in the glance she fixed at John. And Laura, once so silent, now sang like a blackbird, as she flitted to and fro, but her fitful song was always Philip, my king. John felt that there had come a change upon the three, and silently divined whose unconscious influence had wrought the miracle. The embargo was off his tongue, and he was in a fever to ask the question which brings a flutter to the stoutest heart. But though the man had come to the hour had not come to the man. So, by way of companions, he steadied his nerves, he paced the room, pausing often to take notes of his peers, and each pause seemed to increase his wonder and content. He looked at Nan. She was in her usual place, the rigid little chair she loved, because it once was large enough to hold a curly-headed playmate and herself. The old work basket was at her side, and the battered thimble busily at work, but her lips wore a smile that had never worn before. The color of the unblown roses touched her cheek, and her downcast eyes were full of light. He looked at Dee. The inevitable book was on her knee, but its leaves were uncut. The strong-minded knob of hair still asserted its supremacy aloft upon her head, and the triangular jacket still adorned her shoulders in defiance of all fashions, past, present, or to come. But the expression of her brown countenance had grown softer. Her tongue had found a curve, and in her hand lay a card with pots, kettles, and company, inscribed thereon, which she regarded with never a scornful word for the company. He looked at Laura. She was before her easel as of old. But the pale nun had given place to a blooming girl, who sang at her work, which was no prim palace, but a Clyde to her human face to meet the sun. John, what are you thinking of? He stirred, as if Dee's voice had disturbed his fancy at some pleasant pastime, but answered with his usual sincerity. I was thinking of a certain dear old fairy tale called Cinderella. And that is where we are going to end off for today. I'll see you guys later. Bye, guys.
I sure enjoyed that. And next up, we have The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood.
Hi guys! So today we'll be finishing up the chapter, The Shooting Match at Nottingham Town. And last time, what we saw was that the sheriff was setting up a shooting match to trick Robin Hood to come into town so that he could get him. And Robin Hood found out about the contest and came. But Robin Hood has a plan on how to get to the contest, win the contest, and shove it in the sheriff's face without getting caught. And now the archers shot, each man in turn, and the good folk never saw such archery as was done that day, and all the people shouted, for it was noble shooting. And now but 10 men were left of those who had shot before, and of these 10, 6 were famous throughout the land, and most of the folk that gathered there knew them. These men were Gilbert of the Red Cap, Adam of the Dell, Diskin Cruikshank, William O'Leslie, Hubert O'Cloud, and Swithin O'Hertford. 2 others were yeomen of merry Yorkshire, and another was a tall stranger in blue, who said he came from London town, and the last was a tattered straggler in scarlet, who wore a patch over one eye. Now, quoth the sheriff to a man at arms who stood near him, seest thou Robin Hood amongst these men? Nay, that I do not, your worship, answered the man. 6 of them I know right well. Of the Yorkshire yeomen, one is too tall, and the other too short to be the bold knave Robin. And Robin's beard is yellow as gold, while that yon tattered beggar's is scarlet. In scarlet hath the beard of brown, besides being of one eye. And as for the stranger in blue, Robin's shoulders, I ween, are 3 inches broader than his. Then, quoth the sheriff, smiting his thigh angrily, yon knave is a coward as well as a rogue, and dares not show his face amongst good men and true. Then, after they had rested a short time, those 10 stout men stepped forth to shoot again. Each man shot 2 arrows, and as they shot, not a word was spoken, but all the crowd watched with a scarce breath of sound. But when the last had shot his arrow, another shout arose, while many cast their caps aloft for joy of such marvelous shooting. Now by our gracious Lady fair, quoth Sir Amias of the Dell, who bowed with fourscore years and more, sat near the sheriff. Never saw I archery in all my life before, yet I have seen the best hands at the longbow for 80 years and more. And now but 3 men were left, all of those who had shot before. One was Gil of the Red Cap, one tattered stranger in scarlet, and one Adam o' the Dell of Tamworth town. And then the people called aloud, some crying, "Ho for Gilbert of the Red Cap!" and some, "Ho for Adam of the Tamworth!" But not a single man in the crowd called upon the stranger in scarlet. "Now shoot thou well, Gilbert," cried the sheriff, "and if thine be the best shaft, 5 score broad silver pennies will I give to thee besides the prize." "Truly I will do my best," quoth Gilbert right sturdily. "A man cannot do aught his best, but that I will strive to do this day." So saying, he drew forth a fair, smooth arrow with broad feather, and fitted deftly to the string. Then drawing his bow with care, sped the shaft. Straight flew the arrow, and lit fairly in the clout, a finger's breadth from the center. "A Gilbert! Gilbert!" shouted all the crowd, and "Now by my faith!" cried the sheriff, smiting his hands together, "there is a shrewd shot." Then the tattered strangers stepped forth, and people laughed as they saw a yellow patch showed beneath his arm when he raised his elbow to shoot, and also to see him aim with but one eye. He drew the good yew bow quickly, and quickly loosed the shaft. So short was the time that no man could draw a breath betwixt the drawing and the shooting, yet his arrow lodged nearer the center than any other by twice the length of a barley corn. "Now, by all the saints in paradise," cried the sheriff, "that is a lovely shaft in very truth." Then Adam o' the Dell shot carefully and cautiously, and his arrow lodged close between the strangers. Then, after a short space, they all 3 shot again, and one more each lodged an arrow within the clout, but this time Adam o' the Dell was the farthest from the center, and again the tattered stranger's shot was the best. Then after another time of rest, they all shot for the 3rd time. This time Gilbert took great heed to his aim, keenly measuring the distance and shooting with shrewdest care. Straight flew the arrow, and all shouted until the very flags that waved in the breeze shook with sound, and the rooks and daws flew clamoring about the roof of the old grey tower, for the shaft had lodged close beside the spot that marked the very center. "Well done, Gilbert!" cried the sheriff right joyously. "Fain am I to believe the prize is thine, and right fairly won. Now, thou ragged knave, let me see thee shoot a better shot than that." Naught spake the stranger, but he took his place, while all was hushed, and no one spoke, or even seemed to breathe, so that the great silence of wonder of what he would do. Meanwhile, also quiet, stood the stranger, holding his bow in his hand, while one could count 5. Then he drew his trusty yew, holding it drawn but a moment, then loosed the string. Straight flew the arrow, and so true that it smote a grey goose feather off of Gilbert's shaft, which fell fluttering through the sunlit air as the stranger's arrow lodged close besides of his red cap, and in thy very center. No man spoke a word for a while, and no one shouted, but each man looked into the neighbor's face amazedly. "Nay," quoth Adam of the Dell, presently drawing a long breath and shaking his head as he spoke, 2 score years more I have shot shaft, and maybe not all times bad, but I shoot no more this day, for no man can match with yon stranger, whoever so he may be." Then he thrust his shaft into his quiver, rattling and unstrung his bow without another word. Then the sheriff came down from his dais and drew near, all of his silks and velvets, to where the tattered stranger stood leaning upon stout bow, while the good folk crowded around to see the man who shot so wondrously well. "Here, good fellow," quoth the sheriff, "take thou thy prize, and well fairly thou hast won it, I bow. What man be thy name, and whence and whence comest thou? Men do call me Jack, and thence I am. Men do call me Jack of Tividale, and thence I am come, said the stranger. Then, by Our Lady, Jock, thou art the fairest archer that I have ever mine eyes beheld, and if thou wilt join my service, I will clothe thee with a better coat than thou hast upon thy back. Thou shalt eat and drink of the best, and at every Christmas tide 80 marks will be thy wage. I trow thou drawest better bow than that same coward knave Robin Hood. Thou dared not show his face here today. Say, good fellow, wilt thou join my service? Nay, I will not, quoth the stranger. I will be mine own, and by no man in merry England shall thy be my master. Then get thee gone, cried the sheriff, his voice trembling with anger. And by my faith and troth, I have a good part of mind to have thee beaten for thy insolence. And then he turned upon his heel and strode away. It was a right motley company that gathered about the noble greenwood tree in Sherwood's depths that same day. 80 and more of barefoot friars were there, some that looked like tinkers, and some that seemed to be sturdy beggars and rustic hinds, and seated upon the mossy couch was one all clad in tattered scarlet, with a patch over one eye, and in his hand held the golden arrow that was the prize of the shooting match. Then, amidst the noise of talking and laughter, he took the patch from his eye, and stripped away the scarlet rags from off his body, and showed himself all clothed in fair Lincoln green. And quoth he, Easy come these things away, but walnut's stain cometh not so speedily from yellow hair. Then all laughed louder than before, for it was Robin Hood that had won the prize from the sheriff's very hands. And then all sat down to the woodland feast, and talked amongst themselves of merry jests that had been played upon the sheriff, and of the adventures that had befallen each member of the band in his disguise. But when the feast was done, Robin Hood took Little John apart and said, Truly, I am vexed in my blood, for I heard the sheriff say today, Thou shootest better than that coward knave Robin Hood that dared not show his face here today. I would fain let him know who it was that won the golden arrow from his hand, and also that I am no coward as such he takes me to be. Then Little John said, Good master, thou take me and Will Stuteley, and we will send yon fat sheriff news of all this by a messenger he doth not expect. That day the sheriff sat at meat in the great hall of his own house at Nottingham town. Long tables stood down the hall, at which men-at-arms and household servants and good stout villains in all 80 and more. They talked of the day's shooting, and they ate their meat and quaffed their ale. The sheriff sat at the head of the table, upon a raised seat under a canopy, and beside him sat his dame. By my troth, said he, I did reckon full roundly that knave Robin Hood would be at the game today. I did not think he was such a coward. But who could that saucy knave be who answered me to my beard so bravely? I wonder that I did not have him beaten, but there was something about him that spoke of other things than rags and tatters. Then, even as he finished speaking, something fell rattling among the dishes upon the table, while those who sat near started up wondering what it might be. After a while, one of the men-at-arms gathered the courage to pick it up and bring it to the sheriff. Then everyone saw that it was a blunted gray goose shaft, with a fine scroll around the thickness of a goose quill tied to near its head. The sheriff opened the scroll and glanced at it, while the veins upon his forehead swell and his cheeks grew ruddy with rage as he read, for this is what he saw. Now heaven bless thy grace today, say in all sweet Sherwood, for thou didst give the prize away to merry Robin Hood. Whence came this? Cried the sheriff in a mighty voice. Even through thy window, your worship, quoth the man who had handed him the shaft. That's all for today. Thanks, guys.
And next up, our last story for today is the story of Dr. Dolittle. All right, everybody, so we are going to continue with Dr. Dolittle, but we have a lot to read and only a few weeks of summer left, so I'm going to fast forward a little bit. So in the 12th chapter, the prince wants to marry the type of princesses he reads in books, and he wants to change. The doctor tries to help him, but he also realizes that this young boy needs to know who he is and embrace who he is. Anyway, but the prince does help them, and they get on a ship and they sail away, but they leave the alligator to stay in Africa because he really wanted to be back home. So that's where we're going to pick up with the 13th chapter, called Red Sails and Blue Wings. Sailing homeward, the doctor's ship had to pass the coast of Barbary. This coast is the seashore of the Great Desert. It is a wild, lonely place, all sand and stones, and it was here that the Barbary Pirates lived. These pirates, a bad lot of men, used to wait for sailors to be shipwrecked on their shores, and often, if they saw a boat passing, they would come out fast, sailing in their ships, and chase it. When they caught a boat like this one that Dr. Dolittle was on at sea, they would steal everything on it, and after they had taken the people off, they would sink the ship and sail back to Barbary, singing songs and feeling proud of the mischief that they had done. Then they used to make people they caught write home to their friends for money, and if the friends sent no money, the pirates often threw the people into the sea. Now, one shiny day, this doctor and Dab-Dab were walking up and down the ship for exercise. A nice fresh wind was blowing the boat along, and everybody was happy. Presently, Dab-Dab saw the sail of another ship a long way behind them on the edge of the sea. It was a red sail.
"Oh, I don't like the look of that sail," said Dab-Dab. "I have a feeling it isn't a very friendly ship. I'm afraid there is more trouble coming at us."
Jip, who was lying near them taking a nap in the sun, began to growl and talk in his sleep. "I smell roast beef cooking," he mumbled. "Underdone roast beef with brown gravy all over it." "Good gracious," said the doctor. "What's the matter with the dog? Is he smelling in his sleep as well as talking?" "I suppose he is," said Dab-Dab. "All dogs can smell in their sleep." "But what is he smelling? There is no roast beef cooking on our ship." "No," said Dab-Dab, "the roast beef must be on the other ship over there." "But that's 10 miles away," said the doctor. "He couldn't smell that far away, surely."
"Oh, yes he could,
said Dab-Dab.
"You ask him."
Then Jip, still fast asleep, began to growl again, and his lip quivered up angrily, showing his clean white teeth.
"I smell bad men," he growled. "The worst men I've ever smelt. I smell trouble.
I smell a fight. 6 bad scoundrels fighting against one brave man. I want to help him. Woof, woof, woof." Then he barked loud and woke himself up, and with a surprised look on his face.
"See," cried Dab-Dab, "that boat is nearer now. You can count 3 big sails, all red. Whoever it is, they're coming after us. I wonder who they are."
"They are bad sailors," said Jip, "and their ship is very swift, and they're surely the pirates of Barbary." "Well, we must get more sails up on our boat," said the doctor, "so we can go faster and get away from them. Run downstairs, Jip." and fetch me all the sails you can." The dog hurried downstairs and dragged up every sail he could find. But even when all of these were put up on the masts to catch the wind, the boat did not go nearly as fast as the pirates, which kept coming up behind them closer and closer. "This poor ship the princes give us," Gub Gub the pig said. "It was the slowest one he could find. I think might as well try to win a race with the soup tureen as to hope to get away from them in this old barge. Look how near they are now. You can see the mustaches on the face of the men, 6 of them. What are we going to do?" Then the doctor asked Dab Dab to fly up and tell the swallows that the pirates were coming after them in a swift ship, and what should they do about it? When the swallows heard this, they all came down on the doctor's ship, and they told him to unravel some pieces of long rope and make them into a thin strings as quickly as they could. Then the ends of the strings were tied to the front of the ship, and the swallows took hold of the strings with their feet and flew off the boat, and the boat kept sailing. And although the swallows are not very strong, when only 1 or 2 of them are by themselves, it's different when there are a great lot of them together. And there, tied to the doctor's ship, were 1,000 strings, and 2,000 swallows were pulling on each string, all terribly swift flyers. And in a moment, the doctor found himself traveling so fast that he had to hold onto his hat with both of his hands, he felt as though the ship itself were flying through the waves that frothed and boiled at their speed. And all the animals on the ship began to laugh and to dance about in the rushing air, for when they looked back at the pirate ship, they could see that it was growing smaller and smaller, and now, instead of bigger and bigger, the red sails were being left far and far behind. Moving on to the 14th chapter. The Rat's Warning. Uh-oh. Dragging a ship through the sea is hard work, and after 2 or 3 hours, the swallows began to get tired in their wings and also short of breath. Then they sent a message down to the doctor to say that they would have to take a rest soon, and they would have to pull the boat over to an island not far off and hide it deep in the bay till they had got their breath enough to go on. And presently, the doctor saw the island that they had spoken of. It was very beautiful, high green mountains in the middle of it. When the ship had sailed safely into the bay, where it could not be seen in the open sea, the doctor said he would get off on the island and look for water, because there was none left to drink on his ship, and he told the animals to get out too and romp on the grass and stretch their legs. Now, as they were getting off, the doctor noticed that a whole lot of rats were coming up from downstairs and leaving the ship as well. Chip started to run after them because chasing rats had always been his favorite game. But the doctor told him to stop. And one big black cat, who seemed to want to say something to the doctor, now crept forward timidly along the rail, watching the dog out of the corner of his eye. And after he had coughed nervously 2 or 3 times and cleaned his whiskers and wiped his mouth, he said, "You know, of course, that all ships have rats in them, doctor, do you not?" And the doctor said, "Yes." "And you've heard that rats always leave a sinking ship?" "Yes," said the doctor, "I've been told so." "People," said the rat, "always speak of it with a sneer, as though it were something disgraceful. But
You can't blame us, can you? After all, who would stay in a sinking ship if he would get off of it?
It's very natural, said the doctor. Very natural. I quite understand. What was there anything else you wish to say?
Yes, said the rat. I've come to tell you that we're leaving this one, but we wanted to warn you before we go. This is a bad ship you have here. It isn't safe. The sides aren't strong enough. Its boards are rotten. Before tomorrow night, it'll sink at the bottom of the sea.
But how do you know? Said the doctor.
We always know, answered the rat. The tips of our tails get that tingly feeling, like when your foot's asleep, This morning at 6 o'clock, while I was getting breakfast, my tail suddenly began to tingle. At first, I thought it was my rheumatism coming back. So I went and asked my aunt how she felt. You remember her? The long, piebald rat, rather skinny, who came to see you in Puddleby last spring with jaundice? Well, she said her tail was tingling like everything. Then we knew for sure that this boat was going to sink in less than 2 days. And we all made up our minds to leave it as soon as we got near enough to any kind of land. It's a bad ship, Doctor. Don't sail in it anymore. And you'll be surely drowned if you do. Goodbye. We are now going to look for a good place to live on this island.
Goodbye, said the doctor. And thank you very, very much for coming to tell me. Very considerate of you. Very. Now, give my regards to your aunt. I remember her perfectly. Leave that rat alone, Jip. Come here. Come here. Sit down. So then the doctor and all his animals went off, carrying pails and saucepans to look for water on the island where the swallows took their rest. I wonder what the name of this island is, said the doctor as he was climbing up the mountainside. It seems a pleasant enough place. What a lot of birds there are.
Why, these are the Canary Islands, said Dab-Dab. Don't you hear the canaries singing? Aha!
The doctor stopped and listened. Why, to be sure, of course, he said. How stupid of me. I wonder if they can tell us how to find water. And presently the canaries, who heard all about Dr. Dolittle from the birds in passage, came and led him to a beautiful spring with clear water, where the canaries used to take their baths. And they showed him a lovely meadow where the bird seed grew, and so that the other and all the other sights of the island. And the Push-Me-Pull-You was glad they had come, because he liked green grass so much better than the dried apples he had been eating on the ship. And Gub-Gub squeaked for joy when he found a whole valley full of wild sugar cane. A little later, when they had all plenty enough to eat and drink, they were lying on their backs while the canaries sang to them. Two of the swallows came hurrying up, very flustered, very excited. Doctor, doctor, they cried, the pirates have come into the bay and they've all got your ship. They're downstairs looking for things to steal. They've left their own ship with nobody on it. In a hurry, come down to the shore. You can get on their ship, which is very fast, and escape, but you'll have to hurry. That's a good idea, said the doctor. Splendid. And he called to the animals all together at once and said goodbye to the canaries and ran down to the beach. When they reached the shore, they saw the pirate ship with the 3 red sails standing in the water. And just as the swallows had said, there was nobody on it. All the pirates were downstairs in the doctor's ship looking for things to steal. So John Dolittle told the animals to walk very softly, and they all crept onto that pirate ship. So what do you think's going to happen next? Let's see. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I hope you enjoyed the chapters we read, and please tune in again as we continue to read all these books to the very end. And until next time, keep reading.